not here alone in this world. There's somebody else out there for me. So this starts this idea of getting into our head and understanding it's not only what we have, it's not only what we have, but it's starting to acknowledge the fact that there is a giver. So we don't only get happiness when we talk about stuff and things and whatever. We don't only get happiness that we have enough money to live and that we have, kids or whatever it is, that we're educated and that we live in a safe place and all of these things. There's also gratitude in knowing that God is providing for us. That our parents, their expression of love was such and such. That the neighbor is there for me in case I need. All of these things tend to magnify the good, magnify the blessings, and make us happier. When we think back to the Bikurim passage, it doesn't say you shall rejoice in all the good that your family has. It doesn't say that. It says you shall rejoice in all the good that God has given to you. The very fact that God gave it. So in other words, I could just think about the fact, oh good, I'm secure, I'm happy, I'm taken care of, I'm good. But there's more to it than that. There's the idea of being thankful that God cared enough and He made sure that I'm happy. That's an additional level of gratitude and thanks. And it adds a degree of like, Stuart was talking about security, a feeling of there's somebody else there, I'm not alone. So let's go back to the opening question. Is it possible for the things we have to cause us joy? The answer is it definitely could, and it definitely should. If we are more mindful of our blessings, and if we take time, as we saw in the studies, simply to express the gratitude for the things that we have, and for all the blessings, and to act gratefully, this will make us happier. Guaranteed. It's a guarantee. If we do this, we will be happier. We will take time to think about all of the good that we have, and everybody has good, even in the most rotten life. We all have tremendous good that goes unnoticed, gets shoved under the rug. And when we take time to do this, we will be happier, period. One of the key elements that we saw in this is ritualizing this, making it into a practice, okay? To do so at regular intervals, to make a time and place, as it was done in these studies. There literally was a 10-week study where they practiced this habit. To be sure, by the way, and as we know in our own prayers as Jews, once we ritualize something, there is a concern with something becoming stale, with us getting used to the ritual of saying it and not meaning it. So we're not talking about saying things that we don't mean. It's true. We have to be cognizant of the danger that the ritual itself will become, habitual. And we have to be afraid of that. Likewise, you can thank somebody and not really mean it. Yeah, thanks. Or even say it with but not really mean it. So there is some concern about that. But again, between the two, we have what to work with. I would also say that it should be something, I started from time to time, and after today's lesson, I want to tell you, I'm going to confess here, and you guys can, maybe you'll test me on it, you'll keep me on my toes. So I have a whole range of kids, from teenagers to little kids. And yes, trust me, our mornings in our house, it's not something that I want to let anybody else into, what it's like to try to get into school in the morning and all the other excitement that goes on with bedtime or whenever those times are that we're alone behind closed doors. That's when we lock the door, we don't want anyone to show up. And there are times that, I have kids who are more happy, less happy, different times. And I plan on instituting this in our home. The idea of habituating kids, and hopefully myself in the process, to come home and to talk about what are you happy about today. I believe, knowing the few times that I have done it, knowing those times when I've done it, there's no question that just having them focus on this is one of the greatest gifts I can give them. It will make them happier people. It will help them deal with their unhappiness later in life because it's inevitable. It's going to come. And so to give them tools to be able to do this is something I'm looking forward to. But very often, so I'll say to them, I guess, so tell me something good. Tell me, what are you happy about? What are you grateful for today? And so once in a while, I'll have a kid who'll say, everything. And my response is, everything is nothing. Don't give me everything. I want to hear something specific. I want you to think about this, actually. Because if we're always thankful for everything, that means we're not focusing in really and really getting thankful. And so this has to be ritualized, and it's got to be specific. It's got to be specific. Yes, Stuart?
This would be a good time. I'll ask this question. Would you comment on I don't know if it's a Jewish expression, would you comment on the expression, a parent is only as happy as his most unhappy child?
No. It's, look, there's no question that when our kids are unhappy, it takes a toll on us for every reason in the book. And I think that, as I said before, perhaps the greatest gift, we all want to see our kids happy. We all want to see our kids happy. But I got news for you. When we think about it, it's like any other modeling that we do in parenting. By the way, the next course is on parenting, a phenomenal course on parenting, and I highly recommend it. But that being said, one of the greatest things that we can give our kids are learning these coping mechanisms. I'm talking about with mood and emotions. And if they see us getting bent out of shape by every little thing, or even by every big thing, and not being able to utilize some of these tools, or not utilizing them. So no matter how many times we say, I just want you to be happy, they're going to end up saying the same thing to their kids and being miserable. And so it's precisely for this reason that I hope to employ this kind of thing. Because I want to give them those tools, and I want to help them learn what a difference it can make. And hopefully, at the very least, I think it'll make a difference for me. And if it makes a difference for me, automatically it will make for them.
It rolls downhill.
It rolls downhill, that's good. Okay, yeah. Last comment on this topic, because there's one last very, very important point to this class that I must get to. Go ahead, Trudy, George.
One of the tools that I heard a long time ago that I found very helpful is that in most of our life we say things like, I take out the trash, I have to get up in the morning, I have to go to work, all those things we say. If we just change the language and say, I get to get up in the morning, I get to take out the trash, I get to go to work.
It's very good.
It really gives us that sense of gratitude for all the things that we get to do. But I think we have to but it's just a tool. We have to use it in order to
Right.
have it work.
Right. It helps also if we feel that way. And it can help, but like we said over here, the language itself can help us feel that way. It's very good. Okay. Very important point. I think that many people have encountered, perhaps in ourselves, and I can say that I'm sure that I'm like this in some way. What's the barrier? Why do we resist always being full of gratitude? Because this is a very important barrier to break down. Because people do have a tendency not to want to show gratitude. Now, why is that sometimes? Yes, Jeff?
I think some people, it's an expression of vulnerability.
Good. So, expressing gratitude and thanks, it means that I owe you to a certain extent. There's something I owe. I was not deserved. Nobody gave it to me, something that I earned. It was given to me, and therefore, I am vulnerable. First of all, I had a need. And second of all, I feel like now I owe. And people don't want to owe anybody anything. And so one way not to owe anything, like in absolute terms, you don't want to owe, don't borrow. You don't want to have to owe somebody even emotionally. You don't want to feel vulnerable. You don't want to feel in any way, and being vulnerable, you can also be hurt. Okay, so just blind yourself to all of those things and go through life blissfully, knocking into things, and just simply not acknowledging that somebody did something for you. And many of us have this at different stages or with different people in our lives. Sometimes the closest people to ourselves are the people we don't want to acknowledge the kindness they did. The Talmud describes this in a very, very interesting way. Text 19, and we're talking about, think about this text, we're talking about archetypes. We're not just talking about two kinds of guests. We're talking about two kinds of people, or maybe the same person in different circumstances. So here are two kinds of guests that the Talmud describes. What does a good guest say? This is a very rough translation. How much trouble the host took for my sake. How much meat he brought before me. How much wine he brought before me. How many fine rolls he brought before me. And all the trouble that my host took was only for my sake. What does the bad guest say? Or the non-grateful guest? What trouble did this host take? I ate one piece of bread. I ate one slice. I drank one cup. Any trouble that this host took was only for his wife and kids. He was going to do it anyway. He happened to, whatever, I took a little. Look at this language for a moment. Examine this language for a second. And tell me, what are some of the differences in the way these are described? Look how the grateful guest and the ungrateful guest describe the exact same meal. What are some differences? Can you point out? You and I.
He and I.
So when he's talking about, what the good guest talks about, look how much the host did for my sake, for me. Everything is for me. He brought out for me. He personally, he did this for me. What does the bad guest say? The host is not even existent. He's not even there. It's just, I ate this, I ate that. Forget about the host. He didn't do much. He's barely a bit player here. Yeah. Another.
The bad guest was real specific on the numbers. He counted it.
He ate one slice.
No, the good
He had
guest was more
one
generous.
cup. And what does the other guy talk about? He talks about what he brought out for me. He brought out this whole feast. He doesn't talk about how little I took. He was willing to give me everything. The other guy's minimizing it. I only took one. Come on, it's not that big a deal. Come on, you're going to make a big deal about one slice of bread? A roll. Fine, a roll. Fine, there was a piece of meat in it. There was a cup of wine, too, that came with it, but it was one. For God's sakes, right? What else? What other differences are there? What other differences are there in this language?
For my sake as opposed for the other.
Right. So the other one says, this other one says, he was supposed to do it anyway. Oh, he's an Orthodox guy. They're supposed to invite guests. He probably gets his check, at the end of the day when he has somebody else over, right? Or he doesn't really, he didn't really work that hard. He didn't do anything extra for me. That's clearly his attitude. The guy didn't put out for me. He didn't do anything special, right? Not only that, he may have done something good, but generally speaking, he's not such a great guy. That's the sense that you get. Yeah, Jenny.
Just in general, the good guest seems very generous with his language and his appreciation, whereas the other one is the opposite, very stingy with and kind of downplaying everything.
Right. So these two guests, as I said, they're two general approaches to which people, they adopt and adapt their attitudes in their relationship with God and with other people. It's possible for a person to fluctuate between the two and be the good guy on Sunday and the bad guy on Tuesday. That for sure we could be. We can be in those two extremes. And not only that, facts are always open to reinterpretation, right? We can change that situation. But what this indicates is that it's part of the human psyche to resist being grateful. And we need to be aware of it if we're going to overcome this and start to be happier by being grateful. So here's this dichotomy. By being vulnerable, by allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, we allow ourselves to be grateful and to be happier. And so we're going to close ourselves off, not be vulnerable, not be grateful, and be miserable. But as long as I don't owe anybody anything. Right? Or we can be vulnerable, be grateful, and be happier. Those are the choices. Text 20. We don't like to be reminded that we needed help. We don't want to be beholden to our saviors. Gratitude would seem to pose a challenge for this reason alone. Gratitude can be a bitter pill to swallow, humbling us and demanding as it does that we confront our own sense of self-sufficiency. So we may avoid it as we avoid going to the doctor for the annual prostate exam. That's pretty extreme. So what it boils down to, if we're to take this to its end, what it boils down to is us willing to recognize that we are dependent beings. We are dependent on God, and we're dependent on others, and embracing that. The Pharaoh, he said, The Nile is mine, and I made myself. The Medrash tells us, Li Ye'ora va'ani asisini. He described himself as the monarch, as the king, as the god. I own the Nile is mine, and I made it. Right? The commentaries describe Pharaoh as having claimed that he himself made the Nile. And so what kind of personality is this? At the beginning of the book of Shemot, we read that the new Pharaoh came along, and it says, Asher lo yada es Yosef, who knew not Joseph. Now, Joseph was the viceroy who saved Egypt. He saved the world from hunger. He only lived maybe, a generation earlier. Imagine an American president would come along and say he never heard of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. It's ludicrous to think that the Pharaoh didn't know Joseph. What the Torah is saying is he refused to acknowledge the gifts of Joseph. And that there's a lot of politicians like that, and frankly, not just politicians, but us too. How many people have helped us tremendously in our lives, and after time, after the initial thank yous and everything, we actually maybe try to avoid them a little bit, because it's almost embarrassing, it's almost uncomfortable. The fact that I needed help, and I got help, and I was once in that vulnerable position. So we're dependent not only on God, but also on other human beings. In fact, all of us, when you think about it, human beings, of all the species and all the creatures, we are perhaps one of the most dependent on our mothers for the longest period of time of almost any creature in the world. And perhaps God made it that way in order that we focus on it and recognize it. Once we do, once we focus on it, once we verbalize it, once we make it a part of our ritual, then we can start to be the good guest instead of the bad guest. We're able to catch ourselves and to stop interpreting, other things that people do cynically. We can just say, you know what, they might have just been kind and done me a favor. Not for themselves, not for any other side thing. The fact of the matter is I was a recipient of their kindness. And stop reinterpreting it in some kind of cynical way. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And ultimately what this does, we're the greatest beneficiary of that attitude. When we have that attitude towards others, we ourselves can be filled with gratefulness and ultimately with happiness, rather than taking for granted everything we've been given. Trudy, can I ask you to read page 108, the key points of tonight's lesson?
Number 1, when we have been surrounded by a superabundance of blessings since our youth, we tend not to notice the gifts. Hence, the abundance fails to bring us happiness. Number 2, when we obtain something new, we experience a spike of joy. But as we quickly adapt to the fresh circumstance, the joy withers away. This is why humans have an unquenchable thirst for more, for we crave a repeat of that temporary spike of joy. Number 3, this desire for more hinders our ability to be happy. For when we are focused on attaining something, we neglect to contemplate the blessings we already have. In addition, the drive for more causes our minds to dwell on the negative, on that which we do not have. Number 4, when emotions are not verbally expressed, they are diminished and they dissipate. When they are verbally expressed, they flourish and are amplified. By focusing on and talking about the blessings in our lives, we foster happy emotions. By not focusing on that which we are missing, we allow our negative feelings to dissipate. Number 5, ritualizing gratitude at fixed intervals allow us to reap the full happiness benefit from that which we have. Judaism has a built-in system of rituals that facilitates a steady expression of gratitude for all of the blessings in our lives. Number 6, we ought to be grateful not only for the gifts we have, but also for the fact that they are provided by someone who cares. Realizing that God and other people love us and care for us is perhaps an even greater source of happiness than the gifts alone. Number 7, part of the human psyche is naturally resistant to gratefulness. Gratitude is a humbling experience because it demands that we come to terms with the limits of our self-sufficiency. When, however, we acknowledge our dependence on others and express gratefulness, we open up the gates of joy.
I want you to turn to the next, thank you, Trudy. I want you to turn to the next page for 3 exercises for the week. and I really encourage you to take on at least one. Number one, over the next 7 days, express some gratitude to 2 people who have had a positive influence on your life. Somebody who you perhaps have not properly thanked, a parent, a sibling, a teacher, a friend, coworker, mentor. Be specific about what that person did and how it positively affects you. Or B, during Shabbat dinner perhaps, go around the table and ask all of those present to share something about their week for which they are grateful. Start with yourself and then invite others to do the same. Or C, imagine what life would be like, God forbid, without some of the blessings that we take for granted. Our home, our ability to see, hear, walk, anything that currently gives us comfort. And then recite a prayer thanking God for providing that gift. An example would be Modeh Ani, or the Grace After Meals. Do this once a day for 7 days. Finally, so I really encourage you to do this. You guys paid money to take this class. There is real, absolute value in every one of these strategies, whether it's last week's or 2 weeks ago or this week. This is one that's very easy, and it actually can be an amazing, amazing experience, especially if you are surrounded by some others who you can do this with, a friend, a family member, a child, a parent, a coworker. This is an amazing thing. Finally, I want to just say one last point, and that is that it was mentioned a number of times tonight, the idea that this wanting more can be a positive thing. And I just want to say one point about that reading from the Medrash, that somebody who has 100 wants 200, and somebody who has 200 wants 400. Interestingly enough, we are wired that when we have 100 of whatever material or physical thing it is, we want 200. And we want 200, we have 200, we want 400. The flip side, conversely, when it comes to spiritual matters, we usually look at it exactly the opposite.